in the heart of the Arizona desert, where the sun scorches the earth and silence reigns supreme. An old cowboy named Jake Thornton lived his final years in solitude. For decades, he believed he'd seen everything this world had to offer, until one fateful night when the sky exploded in colors he'd never witnessed before. What fell from the heavens wasn't a meteor or satellite debris. It was something alive, something impossible. When Jake discovered a baby crying among the wreckage, wrapped in materials that shimmered like liquid starlight, his world shattered. But the real mystery began at dawn when an ominous knock echoed through his cabin door. A knock that would force this weathered rancher to make choices that would determine not just his fate, but perhaps the fate of two worlds. This is a story of courage, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond between two beings who should never have met. Jake Thornton had lived alone for 17 years, ever since Martha passed away from the cancer that had eaten through her like a slow, merciless fire. His ranch, once sprawling and prosperous, had withered to just 40 acres of dust and memories. At 73 years old, Jake's body moved with the stiffness of rusted machinery, but his mind remained sharp as the hunting knife he kept strapped to his belt. He'd grown accustomed to the silence, the kind of silence that most people fear, but that Jake had learned to embrace like an old friend. The night it happened, Jake had been sitting on his porch, nursing a glass of whiskey and watching the stars. He'd always loved the stars. Martha used to say he loved the sky more than he loved people, and maybe she'd been right. The desert sky was a canvas of infinite possibility, unmarred by the complications of human relationships. That night, the stars seemed particularly bright, pulsating with an energy Jake had never noticed before. It was 2:47 a.m. when the sky tore open. Jake had seen shooting stars before countless times, but this was different. The light that streaked across the darkness wasn't white or yellow. It was a cascade of colors that shouldn't exist together, purple bleeding into electric blue, then fragmenting into shards of emerald green and crimson red. The object moved with impossible speed, yet Jake could track it perfectly, as if time itself had slowed down to allow him to witness this cosmic event. The impact occurred about 3 miles north of his property, beyond the ridge where Martha used to take their daughter Emily to pick wildflowers. Jake felt the tremor through the floorboards of his porch, heard the distant thunder of something massive colliding with earth. His instinct told him to stay put, to wait until morning, to call the authorities. But curiosity, that dangerous, insatiable curiosity that had gotten him into trouble his entire life, compelled him to move. Jake grabbed his flashlight, his rifle, and his jacket. The desert nights were cold, even in summer, and the walk would take at least an hour. His knees protested with each step, his lower back sending sharp reminders that he wasn't young anymore. But Jake pressed forward, driven by something he couldn't name a pull, almost magnetic, drawing him toward whatever had fallen from the sky. The landscape transformed as he approached the impact site. The normally brown earth had taken on a strange luminescence, as if the soil itself had absorbed the otherworldly light. Jake's flashlight seemed inadequate, almost laughable, against the glow emanating from beyond the next rise. When he crested the hill, his breath caught in his throat. The crater was roughly 20 feet in diameter, perfectly circular, with walls that looked melted and fused into glass-like surfaces. In the center lay an object that defied every expectation Jake had formed during his trek. It wasn't a spacecraft in any traditional sense. No rivets, no seams, no visible technology. Instead, it appeared to be a pod, organic and mechanical simultaneously, pulsing with that same multicolored light he'd seen streaking across the sky. Jake approached cautiously, rifle raised, though he felt foolish pointing a weapon at something that clearly operated on principles far beyond his understanding. The pod was warm to the touch, almost body temperature, and it seemed to be breathing, a subtle expansion and contraction that mimicked living tissue. As Jake circled it, searching for an opening or control panel. The pod suddenly split apart like a flower blooming in accelerated time. Inside, cushioned in material that felt like silk but glowed like bioluminescent algae, was a baby. Jake stumbled backward, nearly dropping his rifle. His mind struggled to process what his eyes were showing him. The infant appeared human at first glance: tiny fingers, tiny toes, a face scrunched in distress. But the similarities ended there. The baby's skin held an iridescent quality, shifting between pale blue and soft silver, depending on the angle of light. Its eyes, when they opened, were entirely black, not just the pupils, but the entire eye, like looking into wells of infinite depth. And along its spine ran a series of markings, geometric patterns that seemed to move and rearrange themselves. The baby cried, and the sound pierced Jake's heart in a way nothing had since Emily's death 20 years ago. It was a cry of fear, of confusion, of desperate need. Without thinking, Jake holstered his rifle and reached into the pod. The moment his weathered hands touched the infant's skin, a shock of warmth flooded through him, and images flashed through his mind: vast cities of light, beings of impossible beauty, a journey across unimaginable distances, and then catastrophe, fire, separation, and the desperate act of sending this child away to safety. Jake didn't understand the images, couldn't process their meaning, but he understood the essential truth. This baby was alone, scared, and in danger. That was enough. He wrapped the infant in his jacket, surprised by how light it felt, and began the long walk back to his ranch. The baby quieted against his chest, its impossible eyes staring up at him with an intelligence that seemed far too ancient for something so small. By the time Jake reached his cabin, dawn was breaking across the horizon, painting the desert in shades of orange and gold. He'd constructed a makeshift cradle using blankets in the bottom drawer of his dresser and laid the baby down carefully. The infant made soft cooing sounds, its tiny hands reaching for Jake's calloused fingers. For the first time in 17 years, Jake Thornton didn't feel alone. He knew he should call someone, the sheriff, maybe, or the Air Force Base 200 miles east. But something stopped him. Some protective instinct that whispered this child needed time, needed shelter, needed a chance to simply be before the world descended upon it with questions, tests, and inevitably, exploitation. Jake decided to wait, to think, to figure out what the right course of action might be. He was heating milk on the stove, wondering if the baby would even accept human sustenance, when he heard a knock at his door. 3 precise strikes against the wooden frame. Jake's blood turned to ice. Nobody came to his ranch. Nobody knew he was out here, except the occasional supply truck driver, and they never came this early. He approached the door slowly, rifle in hand, and peered through the dusty window. What he saw made his heart hammer against his ribs. Standing on his porch were 3 figures, humanoid but clearly not human, their bodies encased in suits that seemed to be made of living metal. Their faces were obscured by helmets that reflected the morning sun like mirrors, and in their hands they carried devices that could have been weapons or tools. Jake had no way of knowing which. The knocking came again, more insistent. Jake glanced back at the cradle where the baby lay sleeping, its chest rising and falling peacefully. Then he looked at the door, at the beings who had come looking for what he'd found. He had seconds to make a decision that would alter the course of his life forever. Open the door and face the unknown, or refuse and face the consequences. Either way, his quiet, solitary existence had just ended. Jake's finger tightened on the rifle trigger as he watched the figures through the window. They stood unnaturally still, like statues carved from polished steel. The morning sun blazed behind them, casting long shadows across his porch. But something about their silhouettes seemed wrong, too angular, too precise, as if they existed in slightly sharper focus than the world around them. The knocking ceased. For a moment, Jake dared to hope they might leave. Then a voice emerged, not from any visible speaker, but seemingly from the air itself, a sound that bypassed his ears and resonated directly inside his skull. The sensation was deeply unsettling, like having someone whisper thoughts directly into his brain. Human dwelling occupant. You possess property that does not belong to your species. Surrender the catalyst, child, and you will not be harmed. Resist, and the consequences will be severe but necessary. Jake's jaw clenched. The catalyst child. So that's what the baby was, not just an infant, but something significant, something worth coming across space to retrieve. His mind raced through his limited options. He could hand over the child and return to his peaceful, lonely existence. He could try to negotiate, though what bargaining power did one old cowboy have against beings who could traverse the stars? Or he could fight, a laughable proposition given the technological disparity. Martha's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said during one of their last conversations before the cancer took her completely. Jake, you've never been smart about picking your battles. You just pick the ones that matter and damn the odds. Jake made his decision. He moved away from the window, carefully lifted the baby from the makeshift cradle, and carried it toward the back of his cabin. The infant stirred, those fathomless black eyes opening to stare at him. In that gaze, Jake saw something that strengthened his resolve trust. This tiny being, barely hours old by his estimation, trusted him completely. He wouldn't betray that trust. His cabin had been built during the paranoid years after Martha's death, when Jake had convinced himself that the world was getting more dangerous. He'd installed a storm cellar beneath the kitchen, accessible through a trapdoor hidden under a worn rug. It wasn't much, but it offered concealment and protection. Jake descended the wooden ladder one-handed, the baby cradled in his other arm, and activated the battery-powered lights he'd installed years ago. The cellar was cramped and musty, filled with emergency supplies, canned goods, and ammunition. Jake laid the baby in a storage bin lined with his old camping sleeping bag, then quickly climbed back up to face whatever was coming. As he closed the trapdoor and repositioned the rug, the front door exploded inward. Not opened, not kicked. Exploded, reduced to splinters and smoke in an instant. The three figures glided into his cabin with movements that suggested they were unquite bound by normal physics. Their feet touched the floor, but they seemed to weigh nothing, leaving no footprints on the dusty boards. Your resistance is futile and illogical, the voice said, now clearly emanating from the central figure. It was taller than the others, its armor bearing markings that suggested rank or authority. We have tracked the catalyst child's biosignature to this structure. Concealment is impossible. Jake raised his rifle, knowing how useless it was, but refusing to show weakness. This is my home. You've got no right breaking in here. I don't care what planet you're from, there's laws against this kind of thing. The figure tilted its head, a gesture that might have indicated curiosity or amusement. Jake couldn't tell. Laws, yes. Your species places great faith in abstract social contracts, but you misunderstand the situation. We are not criminals or invaders. We are retrievers, sanctioned by the Galactic Concordat to locate and secure dangerous artifacts and entities. The catalyst child falls into that category. That artifact is a baby, Jake growled. A living child that was crying and scared when I found it. It is a weapon, the figure corrected, its voice taking on a harder edge. A biological catalyst capable of transforming entire ecosystems, conscious and unconscious. In the wrong hands or simply left uncontained, it can unravel the fabric of reality in a cascade effect that would consume your world within days. We are here to prevent that catastrophe. Jake's resolve wavered for a moment. Could that possibly be true? Was the innocent-seeming infant in his cellar actually a doomsday device? But then he remembered the images that had flooded his mind when he first touched the baby, the love, the desperation, the sacrifice. Those weren't the emotions of people launching a weapon. Those were the feelings of parents trying to save their child. If that's true, then why send it here in the first place? Jake challenged. Why Earth? The three figures exchanged glances, or at least Jake interpreted their subtle movements that way. The lead retriever's helmet suddenly retracted, revealing a face that was simultaneously alien and hauntingly beautiful. Its features were symmetrical to an uncanny degree, with large eyes that held 3 pupils each, and skin that seemed to have been carved from polished obsidian. When it spoke, Jake could see that its mouth didn't quite sync with the words he heard. The child was not sent here deliberately. Its parents' rebels wanted for crimes against order hijacked a transport and fled into uncharted space. Your planet was simply where they crashed after we disabled their vessel. The parents are dead. The child is all that remains of a failed insurgency. Now, human, you will tell us where you have hidden it, or we will tear this structure apart molecule by molecule until we find it. Jake's finger moved to the rifle trigger. Over my dead body. That can be arranged, the retriever said without emotion. Before Jake could fire, his rifle simply disintegrated, not melted or destroyed, but unmade, its molecules dispersing into a fine mist that sparkled in the morning light streaming through the shattered door. Jake stared at his empty hands in shock. The retriever raised one hand, and Jake felt an invisible force lift him off his feet and slam him against the wall. Pain exploded through his back and ribs. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The 3 beings began methodically searching his cabin, moving with calculated efficiency. They overturned furniture, scanned walls with handheld devices, and dismantled everything in their path. Jake struggled against the invisible force, but it was like being trapped in concrete. He could only watch helplessly as they drew closer to the kitchen, closer to the cellar entrance. Then the baby cried. The sound pierced the cabin, not the normal cry of a distressed infant, but something more. It resonated at a frequency that made Jake's bones vibrate, made the windows crack, made the very air shimmer. The retrievers froze, their devices going haywire. The force holding Jake released him, and he collapsed to the floor, gasping. The baby's cry intensified, and the rug over the cellar entrance burst into flames, not normal fire, but blue-white flames that didn't spread or consume, just burned with impossible intensity. The trapdoor underneath melted away, revealing the ladder and the cellar below. But the retrievers couldn't approach. Every time they tried to move toward the opening, their bodies jerked backward as if striking an invisible barrier. Impossible, the lead retriever hissed. The child shouldn't be able to manifest defensive capabilities at this stage of development. It's barely past its catalyst emergence. Jake dragged himself to his feet, his body screaming in protest. Through the hole in the floor, he could see the baby standing in the storage bin, actually standing, which should have been impossible for something so young. Its eyes blazed with that otherworldly light he'd seen in the pod, and the geometric patterns along its spine were glowing, rotating, creating symbols that hurt to look at directly. Maybe, Jake rasped, spitting blood, maybe you don't know everything about this child after all. The retrievers regrouped, conferring in a language that sounded like crystal chimes and radio static. Jake took advantage of their distraction to grab his hunting knife from where it had fallen. It was a pitiful weapon against their technology, but it was something. The lead retriever turned back to him, its 3-pupiled eyes narrowing. We cannot breach the defensive field while it remains active, but the child cannot maintain it indefinitely. We will wait, and when the field collapses, we will take what we came for. If you interfere further, human, your death will be neither quick nor painless. They positioned themselves around the cabin, settling into positions that suggested they could wait for hours, days if necessary. Jake knew his situation was desperate. He was injured, outgunned, and trapped in his own home with no way to call for help. The baby's defensive display was impressive, but the retrievers were right. It couldn't last forever. He needed a plan, needed allies, needed something. As if in answer to his desperate thoughts, Jake heard the distinctive rumble of a truck engine approaching from the access road. His heart sank and soared simultaneously. The supply truck from Henderson's General Store wasn't due for another 3 days, which meant this had to be Roy Mackey, the grizzled old prospector who lived 15 miles east and occasionally stopped by to share whiskey and tall talies. The retrievers heard it too. The lead one gestured to its companions, and they moved toward the shattered doorway with predatory grace. Jake's mind raced. Roy was walking into a slaughter. He had to warn him, had to do something. "Roy!" Jake screamed with every ounce of strength left in his damaged lungs. "Get out of here! Run!" The truck's engine cut off. Jake heard the door open, heard Roy's familiar voice calling out. "Jake, what in tarnation happened to your door? You finally get that termite problem taken care of?" The retrievers raised their weapons. And in the cellar below, the baby's cry reached a pitch that shattered every window in the cabin, turning the morning into a storm of flying glass and otherworldly light. Roy Mackey had survived 78 years on this earth through a combination of luck, stubbornness, and an almost supernatural ability to sense danger. When he saw the 3 silver-clad figures emerge from Jake's cabin, weapons raised, every instinct he'd honed over decades of prospecting in hostile territories screamed at him to run. But Roy had also survived by never abandoning a friend. "Jake, you got yourself some mighty strange visitors," Roy called out, trying to keep his voice steady as he chambered a round, not his usual buckshot, but one of the specialty loads he'd gotten from a military surplus dealer, supposedly packed with depleted uranium pellets. He'd never had cause to use them. Until now. The lead retriever's helmeted head swiveled toward Roy with mechanical precision. "Additional human. Your presence is coincidental but unfortunate. Remain in your vehicle, and you will not be terminated. Interfere and share your companion's fate." Roy spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground. "Well now, see, that's where we got ourselves a fundamental disagreement about how things work out here. Jake's my friend, and I don't leave friends to get pushed around by shiny robots. Aliens or whatever the hell you boys are supposed to be." He fired. The shotgun's report echoed across the desert like thunder. The spray of uranium pellets hit the lead retriever center mass, and for a moment, Roy felt a surge of triumph. But the pellets simply bounced off the alien's armor, falling harmlessly to the ground. The retriever looked down at its chest, then back up at Roy with what might have been amusement. "Your projectile weapons are ineffective against our combat shielding. Stand down." "Worth a try," Roy muttered, but his mind was already working through alternatives. If direct assault wouldn't work, maybe distraction would. He reached for another specialty round, this one packed with a combination of magnesium and phosphorus, a makeshift flashbang he'd created for scaring off mountain lions. "Jake, whatever you're planning, better make it fast." Inside the cabin, Jake heard Roy's warning and understood. His old friend was buying time, but time for what? Jake's eyes fell on the propane tanks he kept for his stove and backup generator. They were stored in the utility closet, just 10 feet from where he'd collapsed. It was insane, desperate, and would likely kill him along with the retrievers. But it would also create enough chaos for the baby to escape, assuming the child had any survival instinct at all. Before Jake could act, the baby's defensive field suddenly expanded, shooting through the floor and creating a dome of shimmering energy that encompassed half the cabin. Jake found himself inside the field, and the sensation was overwhelming. He could feel the baby's consciousness brushing against his own, not thoughts exactly, but emotions, intentions, images. The child was afraid, but not helpless. It was learning, adapting, growing stronger with each passing moment. Outside the field, the retrievers were forced back, their weapons sparking and failing as they tried to penetrate the barrier. The lead retriever snarled something in its native language and gestured sharply to its companions. They moved with coordinated precision, forming a triangle around the cabin and raising their arms in unison. Energy crackled between them, building to a visible crescendo of purple lightning. Roy saw what they were doing and didn't need alien technology to understand the intent. They were preparing some kind of massive attack that would overwhelm the baby's defenses through sheer force. He fired his flashbang round, and the desert exploded in blinding white light and choking smoke. The retriever's concentration wavered for just a second, but it was enough. The baby's defensive field pulsed outward in a wave of force that hit like a physical wall. Roy was thrown backward against his truck. The air knocked from his lungs. The retrievers staggered but held their ground, their triangle formation intact. The purple energy between them continued to build, growing brighter, more intense, more destructive. Inside the cabin, Jake forced himself to move despite the pain. He crawled toward the utility closet, each movement an agony, and managed to drag one of the propane tanks out into the open. His hand shook as he opened the valve, filling the air with gas. He knew he was probably killing himself, knew this was a one-way ticket. But Martha's voice whispered in his mind again, "Some things are worth dying for." Just as Jake reached for his lighter, the baby's consciousness touched his mind again. And this time, the message was crystal clear. "No, there's another way. Trust me." Jake hesitated, which probably saved his life. The baby's field suddenly contracted, pulling back into the cellar with incredible speed. The retriever's accumulated energy had nowhere to go without a target to focus on. It simply exploded outward, the backlash catching all three aliens in a maelstrom of their own power. They screamed the first genuinely emotional sound Jake had heard from them, as the purple lightning consumed them. When the light faded, the retrievers were on the ground, their armor cracked and smoking, clearly alive but incapacitated. Jake stared in disbelief. The baby had somehow anticipated their attack, had used it against them by simply refusing to be there when it landed. Roy struggled to his feet, blood running from a cut above his eyebrow. "Jake, you still alive in there?" "Barely," Jake called back. He made his way to the cellar opening and looked down. The baby was sitting calmly in the storage bin, those endless black eyes staring up at him with an expression that might have been satisfaction. "Roy, I need you to see something. And I need you to believe me when I tell you what happened." Roy entered through the destroyed doorway, his shotgun still at the ready, and froze when he saw the cellar. Is that ... is that a baby?" "Jake, what in the name of—" "It's not human," Jake said simply. "It came from the stars. These things," he gestured to the groaning retrievers, "they came to take it. Said it's dangerous, some kind of weapon. But I don't believe them. I think they're the dangerous ones." Roy studied the baby for a long moment, then looked at his friend. "This is bigger than us, Jake. Way bigger. We need to call someone, the military, the government. Hell, I don't even know who you call for something like this. No." Jake's voice was firm. "The moment we do that, this child disappears into some black site laboratory and we never see it again. It'll spend its life being studied, tested, probably experimented on. I won't let that happen. Then what do you propose we do? These three aren't the only ones coming. You know that, right? There'll be more. And they'll be ready next time." Jake was about to respond when a new sound cut through the air, the distant but unmistakable thrum of helicopter rotors. Multiple helicopters, approaching fast from the south. Both men rushed to the window and saw them cresting the horizon. 3 black military choppers, unmarked but clearly military grade. "How did they know?" Roy whispered. "How did they get here so fast?" The lead retriever, struggling to sit up, let out a rasping laugh. "Human governments have been monitoring for breaches in your atmospheric envelope ... for decades. The catalyst child's arrival was impossible to hide. They're coming. For what's ours?" Jake and Roy exchanged desperate glances. The situation had just escalated from dire to impossible. They had 3 incapacitated aliens, 1 infant of cosmic significance, and approximately 3 minutes before the United States military descended on them with questions, weapons, and authority that brooked no resistance. "The old mine," Roy said suddenly. "Remember the abandoned copper mine about 2 miles west? The one with all the collapsed tunnels?" Jake's eyes lit up. "The back entrance. The one that comes out near Devil's Canyon. Can you ride? Do I have a choice?" The 2 old men moved with a speed that belied their age. Roy ran to his truck and pulled out 2 backpacks filled with emergency supplies he always kept stocked. Jake descended into the cellar, wrapped the baby in his jacket again, and felt that strange warmth flood through him once more. The child's eyes met his, and Jake could swear he saw understanding there and awareness that they were in this together now. The retrievers tried to stop them, but their armor was damaged, their weapons non-functional. The lead one managed to grab Jake's ankle as he passed, its grip surprisingly weak. "You don't understand. What you're protecting, the catalyst child, will be the death of everything you love. Please ... double quotes. Jake kicked free. "Maybe, but it'll be the child's choice, not yours, and not some government's." The abandoned copper mine was a labyrinth of darkness and decay. Support beams that should have been replaced decades ago groaned under the weight of earth and time. Water dripped from unseen sources, creating pools that reflected their flashlight beams like scattered stars. Jake's breathing grew more labored with each step deeper into the tunnels, but he pushed forward, driven by the knowledge that stopping meant capture, and capture meant losing the child he'd already begun to love. Roy led the way, his prospector's instinct guiding them through intersections and collapsed passages. The baby remained eerily quiet, its glowing patterns providing enough illumination that they could almost have abandoned their flashlights entirely. Every few minutes, they'd pause and listen for sounds of pursuit. Sometimes they heard nothing. Other times, distant voices echoed through the tunnels, distorted and magnified by the acoustics until it was impossible to tell how close their hunters truly were. "The back entrance is another half-mile," Roy whispered, consulting a mental map built from years of exploring these abandoned sites. "But Jake, we need to talk about what happens when we get out. We can't keep running forever. You're not well, and that baby, that thing, it's going to draw attention wherever we take it." Jake knew Roy was right, but admitting it meant confronting an impossible situation. "I've been thinking," he said quietly, "about what that retriever said, that the baby's parents were rebels, that they were wanted for crimes. You believe that?" "I believe it's more complicated than good guys and bad guys. But I also believe that child's parents loved it. I felt that when I first touched it. Whatever they did, wherever they came from, they were trying to save their baby. That matters." They rounded a corner and found themselves in a larger chamber, what looked like an old excavation room. Equipment from the 1950s lay scattered in rusting pickaxes, ore carts, ancient lunch pails. Roy swept his flashlight across the space, checking for exits, and froze. "Jake, we got a problem." Standing in the far corner of the chamber was a figure, not human, not a retriever, but something else entirely. It was tall, perhaps 7 feet, and its body seemed to be made of shadow and starlight simultaneously. Where the retrievers had been all hard angles and metallic precision, this being was fluid, organic, beautiful in an unsettling way. It wore no armor, no suit, just robes that moved like liquid darkness. "Peace," the figure said, and its voice was nothing like the retriever's. It was warm, melodious, achingly familiar in a way Jake couldn't place. "I mean you no harm, Jake Thornton. I've come to speak with you about the child you protect." Jake raised his hunting knife, a laughable gesture against this entity, but all he had. "Who are you?" "Another bounty hunter. Another government agent. I am Chiron of the Luminar Order, and I am the one who helped the child's parents escape. I am the reason you hold that baby now Instead of it being dissected in some Concordat laboratory, the being stepped forward, and Jake noticed that its feet didn't quite touch the ground. The retrievers told you half-truths. The child is indeed powerful, indeed dangerous if left without guidance. But it is not a weapon. It is a person. A child born with abilities that could reshape reality, yes, but also born with the capacity for choice, for growth, for love. Roy kept his shotgun trained on the newcomer. Real convenient you show up now, after we've done all the running and fighting. I could not reveal myself earlier. The retrievers would have detected my energy signature and called for reinforcements neither of us could handle. But the vegetation barrier the child created has disrupted their scanning equipment. We have a window brief but sufficient to speak freely. Jake studied the being carefully. Everything about his life for the past 24 hours defied logic and reason. Why should trusting an alien mystic be any different? "What do you want?" "To offer you a choice," Chiron said, gliding closer. The baby's eyes tracked the being's movements with keen interest. "The parents you felt in your visions, they were scientists, philosophers, dreamers who believed that beings like this child should not be controlled by empires or governments. The Galactic Concordat fears what it cannot regulate, and so it hunts those who possess abilities beyond their understanding." "You're saying the baby's parents were the good guys?" Jake asked. "I'm saying the conflict between the Concordat and the Liberation Front is not as simple as law versus criminality. It is about freedom versus control, about whether sentient beings should be allowed to exist without constant surveillance and suppression." Chiron's form shimmered, and suddenly, images appeared in the air around them, holographic projections showing vast cities' courtrooms filled with beings of 100 different species, and at the center children like the baby Jake held but older, their abilities shackled by technological restraints. "The Concordat has been capturing catalyst beings for centuries," Chiron continued. "They claim it's for the greater good, to prevent catastrophic accidents. But in truth, they use these beings as living batteries, their reality-shaping powers harvested to fuel the Concordat's expansion across the galaxy. The Liberation Front fights to free them, to give them choice." Roy lowered his shotgun slightly. "So what's the catch? Why not just take the baby yourself? Why involve us?" "Because the child is bonded with Jake." Chiron gestured toward them, and Jake realized the baby's geometric patterns were pulsing in rhythm with his own heartbeat. "This is extraordinarily rare. Catalyst beings typically bond only with their biological parents. But Jake, in your moment of compassion, in your choice to protect rather than exploit, you formed a connection that even I do not fully understand. To separate you now would traumatize the child irreparably." Jake's arms tightened around the baby protectively. "Then what are you proposing? Come with me. There is a sanctuary hidden from both the Concordat and your human governments, where catalyst beings and their guardians live in peace. The child can grow there safely, learn to control its abilities, and eventually choose its own path. You would be its guardian, its teacher, its father in all the ways that matter." It sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was. Jake had lived long enough to know that easy solutions to complicated problems rarely worked out. And the cost? There's always a cost. Kieran's expression, difficult to read on that alien face, seemed to convey sadness. "You would leave Earth behind, forever. The sanctuary exists in a fold of space-time that your planet cannot access without luminar guidance. You would never see your world again, never return to your home, never reconnect with any human relationships you've left behind. It is exile. Jake Thornton. Comfortable, safe exile, but exile nonetheless." Jake felt the weight of that statement settle over him like a physical thing. Leave Earth. Leave the ranch that he and Martha had built together, where her memories still lingered in every floorboard and window frame. Leave the desert he'd known his entire life. Leave humanity itself. But what did he really have here? The ranch was falling apart. His friends were few and aging. Emily was long dead, and he'd never had other children. He was alone, had been alone for 17 years, and would remain alone for however many years he had left. Against that emptiness, the warm weight of the child in his arms felt like a gift, like a second chance he'd never expected and didn't deserve. "Roy," Jake said quietly, "what do you think?" The old prospector shook his head slowly. "I think you're asking the wrong person. I can't make this decision for you, Jake, but I can tell you this: in all the years I've known you, since before Martha passed, I ain't never seen you look the way you looked when you were holding that baby back at the cabin. You looked alive again. You looked like you had a purpose." Jake turned his attention back to Kyron. "The human military is still out there. Even if I wanted to go with you, they're not going to just let us walk away. The vegetation barrier will hold for another hour, perhaps 2. After that, yes, they will break through. But I have a ship concealed nearby, shielded from detection. We can be gone before they reach us if you make your choice now." The baby stirred in Jake's arms, making soft cooing sounds. Its tiny hand reached up and touched Jake's weathered cheek, and he felt that flood of warmth and connection again. In his mind's eye, he saw flashes of the future, not concrete predictions, but possibilities. He saw the child growing, learning, laughing. He saw himself teaching it about honor and compassion, about choosing kindness over cruelty. He saw a life that had meaning again, purpose again, love again. But he also saw the alternative. Saw military trucks arriving at the mine entrance, saw soldiers in hazmat suits taking the baby away while he was restrained. Saw himself return to his empty ranch, questioned and monitored for the rest of his life, dying alone with nothing but regrets and what-ifs. "I need guarantees," Jake said finally. "I need to know that this sanctuary is real, that you're not just leading us into some other trap." Kyron extended one hand, and Jake felt a sensation like static electricity. "Touch my hand and see for yourself. I will open my mind to you, let you verify the truth of what I've claimed. But be warned, the experience can be overwhelming for humans." Jake hesitated only a moment before reaching out. The instant their hands met, his consciousness exploded outward. He saw the sanctuary, a space station hidden in the folds between dimensions, populated by hundreds of beings of all shapes and descriptions. He saw children playing with abilities that defied physics, creating art that existed in 4 dimensions, singing songs that colored the air. He saw guardians like himself, humans and aliens alike, who had chosen to raise these special children in safety and love. But he also saw the danger. Saw Concordat forces constantly searching, probing, trying to locate the sanctuary. Saw the Liberation Front fighting desperate battles to protect it. Saw the reality that safety was never absolute, that choosing this path meant choosing a life of vigilance and risk. Jake pulled his hand back, breathing hard. The visions faded, but the truth of them remained. "It's real," he said to Roy. "Everything he said. It's real." Roy nodded slowly. "Then I reckon you know what you gotta do. Come with me," Jake said suddenly. "You've got nothing holding you here either. Your kids moved to the East Coast, haven't visited in years. You're alone too, Roy. Come with us." For a moment, something flickered in Roy's eyes. Temptation, hope, the desire for one more adventure. But then he smiled sadly and shook his head. "I appreciate that, old friend. More than you know. But my bones belong in this desert. I've got a few years left, and I want to spend them on Earth, under Earth's sky. Besides," he pulled out a battered flask and took a swig, "someone's got to tell the story. Someone has got to make sure people remember that Jake Thornton found something wonderful and had the courage to protect it." Jake felt tears burning in his eyes. He stepped forward and embraced his friend. The baby pressed between them. "You've been a good friend, Roy Mackey. The best. You too, Jake. You too." Roy pulled back and looked at the baby. "You take care of him, you hear? He's ornery and stubborn, but he's got a good heart." Best heart I've ever known. Jake turned to Kyron. All right, I'll go. But on one condition, if the child ever wants to return to Earth, to learn about its birth world and the species that first sheltered it, you make that happen. Deal? Deal. Deal. Kyron agreed. Now we must move. The barrier is weakening faster than I anticipated. They made their way deeper into the mine, following Kyron through passages that seemed to open before them and close behind them, as if the very rock was responding to the Luminar's presence. Eventually, they emerged into a hidden valley that Jake had never known existed, despite decades of exploring this region. Sitting in the center of the valley was a ship, unlike anything Jake had seen in the alien pod or the retriever vessels. This was organic and geometric simultaneously, as if grown rather than built. Roy stopped at the valley's edge. This is where I leave you. Jake wanted to say something profound, something that would capture decades of friendship and the magnitude of this moment. But all that came out was, thank you. No need for thanks between friends. Now get going before I change my mind about letting you have all the fun. Jake carried the baby toward the ship. As they approached, a doorway irised open, revealing an interior that seemed to exist in more dimensions than should be possible. He paused at the threshold and looked back. Roy was standing silhouetted against the morning sun, one hand raised in farewell. Jake raised his own hand, committing the image to memory, his last view of Earth, his last connection to the life he'd lived for 73 years. Then he turned and stepped into the ship. The interior was warm and welcoming, with surfaces that shifted to accommodate his human form. Kyron moved to what appeared to be a control panel, though it responded to thought as much as touch. Find a comfortable position and secure the child. The transition through dimensional barriers can be disorienting. Jake sat in a chair that molded itself around him. The baby seemed completely comfortable, its black eyes wide with curiosity rather than fear. Through a viewport that hadn't been there a moment ago, Jake could see Roy walking back toward the mine entrance, could see military vehicles beginning to crest the hills in the distance. Initiating departure sequence, Kyron announced. The ship didn't so much lift off as simply exist elsewhere. One moment they were in the valley, the next they were thousands of feet above it. Jake watched as the desert shrank below them, watched as the curvature of Earth became visible, watched as the blue marble of his home world receded into the vastness of space. The baby made a questioning sound, and Jake looked down into those infinite eyes. "We're going home," he said softly. "A new home for both of us." As Earth disappeared from view, replaced by the impossible beauty of stars unfiltered by atmosphere, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in 17 years. He felt peace. He felt purpose. He felt love. Far below, in the hidden valley, Roy Mackey retrieved a video camera from his pack and began recording. "My name is Roy Mackey," he said to the lens, "and I've got a story to tell you about the day the stars came down to the Arizona desert, and about the bravest man I ever knew, ... The journey through dimensional barriers was exactly as disorienting as Kyron had warned. Jake's perception of reality shattered and reformed dozens of times as the ship navigated through layers of existence that human physics had never discovered. He saw colors that his eyes weren't designed to process, heard harmonies that existed in frequencies beyond normal hearing. The baby seemed unaffected, actually appearing to enjoy the experience, its geometric patterns shifting and dancing in response to each new dimension. When the transitions finally stopped, Jake found himself staring through the viewport at something that defied every expectation. The sanctuary wasn't a planet or a conventional space station. It was a structure that existed simultaneously in multiple states, solid and ethereal, vast and intimate, ancient and newly formed. Its architecture flowed like frozen music, buildings that were also gardens, pathways that were also rivers of light. "Welcome," Kyron said, "to Haven." The ship docked at a platform that emerged from the structure like a petal unfurling. As they disembarked, Jake felt gravity shift to something comfortable for his human physiology, not Earth normal, but close enough that his old knees didn't protest. The air smelled of flowers he'd never encountered, mixed with something like ozone and vanilla. They were greeted by a welcoming committee of sorts, 5 beings of various species, all wearing robes similar to Kyrin's, but in different colors that seemed to signify different roles or ranks. One of them, a being that resembled a crystalline mantis, stepped forward and spoke in that same thought voice the retrievers had used. "Jake Thornton of Earth, we have heard much about you from Chiron. You are the first human to join us as a guardian. This is unprecedented." Jake shifted the baby in his arms, uncomfortable with the attention. "I didn't do anything special. I just did what anyone with a conscience would do." "No," another being said. This one appeared humanoid, but with skin that flowed like liquid mercury. Most would have chosen differently. Fear drives many species to reject what they don't understand. You chose compassion over fear. That is precisely why the child bonded with you. They were led through Haven's corridors, and Jake's sense of wonder grew with each turn. Through archways, he glimpsed classrooms where young catalyst beings practiced their abilities under careful supervision. One child making flowers bloom from thin air, another manipulating gravity to create impossible sculptures, a third singing notes that solidified into glowing spheres of sound. They passed gardens where the vegetation responded to emotional states, changing colors and patterns based on the feelings of those nearby. They walked through a library where knowledge existed not in books, but in crystalline matrices that you could touch and absorb directly into your mind. Everywhere Jake looked, he saw evidence of a society built around nurturing rather than controlling, teaching rather than exploiting. Finally, they arrived at what would be Jake's quarters, a space that the sanctuary had somehow adapted to his human needs and preferences. There was a bed similar to the one he'd had on the ranch, a rocking chair like the one Martha had used, even a window that displayed a real-time view of Earth from this impossible distance. "The sanctuary reads your memories and desires," Chiron explained. "It creates environments that comfort and support each guardian. You will be able to modify these quarters as you wish." A cradle had been prepared in the corner, far more sophisticated than the dresser drawer Jake had improvised, but still somehow capturing the same intention. He laid the baby down gently, and the child immediately settled, its patterns dimming to a soft glow as it drifted towards sleep. "What happens now?" Jake asked quietly. "Now, you rest. You've been through an ordeal that would have broken many beings. Tomorrow, we begin your training." "Training for what?" "For being a guardian. The child will need more than protection, Jake. It will need education, guidance, boundaries. It will need someone to help it understand its powers and the responsibility that comes with them. That someone is you." After Chiron left, Jake sat in the rocking chair and stared at the sleeping child. Exhaustion pulled at him, but his mind was too full of questions and wonder to allow sleep. He thought about Roy, about the ranch, about the life he'd left behind. There was grief in that thinking, but also relief. He'd been dying slowly in that desert, fading away in isolation and regret. Now he had purpose again. The baby stirred, and Jake moved to the cradle instinctively. Those black eyes opened, staring up at him with an intensity that was both unnerving and comforting. On impulse, Jake began to sing an old lullaby that Martha had sung to Emily, one he'd thought he'd forgotten. His voice was rough and off-key, but the baby seemed transfixed, its patterns pulsing in time with the melody. When the song ended, Jake made a decision. "You need a name," he said softly. "Can't keep calling you the child or the baby. Your parents probably had a name for you in their language, but I don't know it. So I'm going to give you a name for mine. Is that okay?" The baby made a sound that Jake chose to interpret as assent. "Stella," he said. "It means star in Latin. You came from the stars, and you shine just as bright. Stella Thornton. How's that sound? The baby Stella reached up with one tiny hand, and Jake offered his finger. Her grip was surprisingly strong. As they connected, he felt that now familiar flood of warmth and soft fleeting images. Himself holding her, teaching her, watching her grow, but also something new: gratitude. The child was grateful to him, grateful for protection, for the name, for choosing her over safety and comfort. "You're welcome, little Stella," Jake whispered. "You're welcome." The next morning, though time was difficult to track in Haven, Jake was awakened by a gentle chime. Stella was still sleeping peacefully in her cradle, her patterns barely visible in the soft light. A being appeared at his door, one he hadn't met the previous day. This one looked almost human, except for the 4 arms and eyes that held no whites, just swirling galaxies of purple and gold. "Good morning, Guardian Thornton. I am Melody, and I will be your primary instructor. When you are ready, please bring Stella to the Garden of First Steps. Other guardians and their charges await." Jake, dressed in the clothes that had appeared somehow in his quarters comfortable and practical, similar to what he'd worn on the ranch but made from materials that regulated temperature and cleaned themselves. He carefully lifted Stella from the cradle and made his way to the Garden of First Steps, following illuminated pathways that seemed to anticipate his destination. The garden was breathtaking. It existed under a dome that displayed an ever-shifting sky, sometimes showing Earth's blue, sometimes alien worlds with multiple suns, sometimes just a pure starfield of open space. About 20 guardians were gathered, each with a young catalyst being. Jake noticed immediately that he was the oldest guardian by at least 2 decades, and possibly the only human. Melody addressed the group. "Guardians, you have each been chosen because you possess qualities that catalyst beings need in their development: patience, compassion, wisdom, courage. But choosing to be here and succeeding as a guardian are different challenges. Today begins your formal training." What followed was simultaneously exhausting and exhilarating. Jake learned about the different types of catalyst abilities. Some children could manipulate matter, others energy. Still others affected more abstract concepts like probability or emotion. Stella, Melody explained, showed signs of being an ecological catalyst, capable of influencing and accelerating biological processes. "The vegetation that erupted during your escape," Melody said, was Stella's panic response. "As she matures and gains control, she will be able to shape entire ecosystems with intention rather than instinct. This makes her extraordinarily valuable and extraordinarily dangerous if she lacks proper guidance." Jake participated in exercises designed to strengthen his bond with Stella, learning to interpret her emotional states and respond appropriately. He met other guardians, each with their own remarkable stories of how they'd come to Haven. There was Tarn, a warrior from a militaristic species who had defected after being ordered to terminate a catalyst child. There was Whisper, a being made entirely of cohesive energy who communicated through color and vibration. There was even another guardian named Sarah, a human woman from Earth's future who had time-traveled to escape persecution. "Wait," Jake interrupted when Sarah introduced herself. "Earth's future? Time travel?" Sarah smiled sadly. "In my time, about 200 years from your present, humanity discovered catalyst beings living hidden among us. The response was not kind. I'm a historian who protected a young catalyst boy from government forces. When we had no other options, the Liberation Front brought us here, outside of linear time. It's complicated. Everything's complicated now," Jake muttered. During a break, Jake found himself in conversation with Tarn, whose charge was a child capable of manipulating metal at the molecular level. "How do you handle it?" Jake asked. "The responsibility, the weight of knowing that one mistake in raising them could have catastrophic consequences?" Tarn's face broad and scarred broke into a surprisingly gentle smile. "The same way parents have handled it throughout the universe since the beginning of time. You do your best. You make mistakes, you learn, and you love them anyway. Yes, these children have extraordinary powers. But they are still children. They need what all children need: security, structure, affection, and someone who believes in them. That evening, Jake stood at his window with Stella in his arms, watching Earth rotate slowly in the distance. He thought about Roy, wondered if his friend had survived his interrogation by the military, hoped the story Roy had recorded would someday reach people who needed to hear it. Stella made a questioning sound, and Jake realized she was looking at Earth too, her black eyes reflecting the blue-white sphere. "That's where I'm from," Jake said quietly. "Where we met. It's a complicated place, full of beauty and ugliness, kindness and cruelty. Your parents sent you there hoping you'd be safe. Maybe they knew someone would find you. Maybe they just hoped." Stella's hand touched the window, and for a moment, Jake could have sworn he saw patterns appear on Earth's surface, matching the geometric designs on her spine. "Don't worry," he added. "I'll make sure you know about it, about where you landed and the world that sheltered you, even if just for a night. That's part of your story too." Kyron appeared in the doorway. "Forgive the intrusion, but there is something you should know. We've been monitoring Earth's communications. Your friend Roy's video has reached the internet. It's spreading rapidly." Jake's heart clenched. "Is he okay? Did they arrest him?" "He is being questioned, but he is unharmed. And his testimony is causing exactly the kind of conversation the Liberation Front hoped. For debate about how humanity should respond to extraterrestrial contact, questions about government transparency, sympathy for the idea of protecting rather than exploiting beings different from ourselves. So something good came from all this mess. More than you know. Your story, Jake Thornton, is changing perspectives across multiple worlds. The Concordat cannot silence it without confirming its truth. The Liberation Front is using it to recruit new members. And on Earth, people are looking up at the stars with new possibilities in mind." Jake looked down at Stella, who had fallen asleep against his chest. "I just wanted to save one baby. I didn't mean to start anything bigger. The most profound changes often begin with one simple act of compassion. You saved Stella. In doing so, you may have helped save countless others like her." That night, Jake lay in bed with Stella sleeping in the cradle beside him. He thought about the future, teaching her to walk, to talk, to control her abilities. He thought about the challenges ahead, the dangers still lurking, the Concordat forces that would never stop hunting. But mostly he thought about how, against all odds, he'd been given a second chance. Not just at fatherhood, but at life itself. "I won't let you down," he whispered into the darkness. "I promise." And as he drifted towards sleep, he felt Stella's consciousness brush against his one more time, carrying a simple message that needed no words. "I know." 5 years passed. Time moved differently in Haven, not faster or slower, but more purposefully, as if each moment was allowed to unfold at exactly the pace it needed. Jake Thornton, now 78, but feeling healthier and stronger than he had in decades, thanks to Haven's restorative environment, stood in the garden of first steps watching Stella practice her abilities. She'd grown into a remarkable child. Her appearance had evolved, the iridescent quality of her skin settling into something more consistently human-like, though her eyes remained that stunning, depthless black. The geometric patterns along her spine had expanded, now covering her shoulders and arms in designs that shifted and changed with her emotional state. She could speak fluently in 3 languages: English, the Luminar tongue, and the clicking musical language of the Verdant, a species of plant-based beings who had become her favorite playmates. Today's lesson involved precision control. Melody had placed 12 seeds in front of Stella, each from a different world, each requiring different conditions to germinate. The challenge was to grow all 12 simultaneously, creating a miniature ecosystem where each plant received exactly what it needed without overwhelming or stunting the others. Stella closed her eyes, her small face scrunched in concentration. Her hands moved in patterns Jake had learned to recognize, not necessary for her powers to work, but helpful for her to visualize and direct the energy. The seeds began to respond. The first sprouted quickly, shooting up into a fern-like plant with fronds that shimmered like silver. The second emerged more slowly, a flowering vine that immediately began reaching for the supports Melody had provided. One by one, all 12 plants grew, each developing at its own pace but in harmony with the others. Jake felt pride swell in his chest. When they'd started these exercises 2 years ago, Stella had struggled with controlling even a single plant's growth. Now she was managing a complex ecosystem with a delicacy that impressed even Melody. "Excellent, Stella," Melody praised. "Your control improves daily. But remember, power without wisdom is dangerous. Growing things is only half the skill. Knowing when to stop growing them, when to let nature take its course, that is equally important." "I know," Stella said, and Jake heard Martha's inflection in her voice. The child had never met his late wife, but somehow, through their bond and his memories, she'd absorbed elements of Martha's speech patterns. It was both comforting and bittersweet. "Papa tells me that all the time. He says Uncle Roy used to say that the best ranchers weren't the ones who controlled everything, but the ones who worked with the land." Jake smiled at being referenced. Over the years, he'd shared countless stories about Earth, about the ranch, about Roy and Martha, and the life he'd lived before Stella arrived. She was fascinated by it all, constantly asking questions about the desert, about animals she'd never seen, about human customs and culture. After the lesson, Stella ran to Jake and threw her arms around him. "Did you see? I didn't mess up even once." "I saw. You were amazing, little star." The nickname had stuck, evolving from the formal Stella he used in serious moments to Little Star for everyday affection. "I'm so proud of you." They walked together through Haven's corridors toward the communal dining area. Stella chattered about everything and nothing, her plans to grow a garden specifically for the verdant children, her curiosity about Earth's oceans, her questions about how chocolate tasted. Haven's food synthesizers could replicate most things, but they'd never quite gotten chocolate right. In the dining area, they joined other guardian families. Jake had grown close to many of them over the years. Torrance Charge, a boy named Cray, had become Stella's best friend despite their very different powers. Sarah and her young charge, Micah, often joined them for meals, sharing stories about Earth from 2 different eras. These moments of normalcy, of community, had become the foundation of Jake's new life. But normalcy in Haven was always temporary. During their meal, alarms began to sound, not the emergency klaxons that indicated imminent danger, but the warning tones that meant a situation required attention. Karen's voice echoed through the sanctuary's communication system. "All guardians to the council chamber immediately." This is not a drill. Jake's heart sank. He'd known these 5 years of peace couldn't last forever. He looked at Stella, saw the fear flash across her face, and squeezed her hand. "It's going to be okay. Go to the children's quarters with Cray and the others. The guardians will handle whatever this is. But Papa, no arguments. You know the protocols. If I'm not back in 2 hours, Mrs. Whisper will come get you and explain what's happening. Trust me, little star." Stella nodded reluctantly and followed the other children toward the secure area. Jake joined the stream of guardians, heading to the council chamber, his old cowboy instincts kicking in, assessing exits, watching for signs of panic, preparing for the worst while hoping for the best. The council chamber was a circular room where Haven's leadership made decisions affecting the entire sanctuary. Today, the chamber held not just the council members, but representatives from the Liberation Front and, surprisingly, several beings Jake didn't recognize. Their uniforms suggested military, but not Concordat military. Karen stood at the chamber's center. "Guardians, we face a situation unprecedented in Haven's history. The Concordat has located us. Murmurs of shock and fear rippled through the assembled guardians. Jake felt his stomach drop. This was the nightmare scenario they'd all been briefed about, but hoped would never occur. Before panic sets in, Chiron continued, know that we have time. The dimensional barriers that conceal Haven are still intact, and the Concordat fleet cannot breach them without extensive preparation. We estimate we have between 6 and 8 weeks before they can mount an effective assault. However, we must make difficult decisions about Haven's future. One of the council members, an elderly being named Curator Vex, stepped forward. We have 3 options. First, we can evacuate. Abandon Haven and scatter to hidden worlds throughout the galaxy, each guardian taking their charge and going into deep hiding. This ensures survival, but ends our community and our mission. Second, we can stand and fight. The Liberation Front has offered military support, and with the defensive capabilities we've developed, we might hold off the Concordat, at least temporarily. But this would mean transforming Haven from a sanctuary into a fortress, and we would be teaching our children to live in a state of perpetual war. What's the third option? Sarah asked. Negotiation, Chiron said. The beings you see here in unfamiliar uniforms are representatives from the Galactic Coalition, a group of species that has recently broken from the Concordat over philosophical differences. They're offering to mediate a treaty. The Concordat would acknowledge Haven's sovereignty in exchange for certain concessions. What kind of concessions? Jake asked, a cold suspicion forming. Oversight, one of the coalition representatives said. Regular inspections to ensure that catalyst beings are not being weaponized or trained for terrorist purposes. Limits on how many children can be housed here at one time. Registration of all guardians and their charges in a secure database accessible only to coalition authorities. That's a gilded cage, Torrin said angrily. You're asking us to accept the very control and surveillance we came here to escape. We're asking you to accept reality, the coalition representative countered. The Concordat will not allow Haven to exist as a lawless sanctuary indefinitely. This treaty offers a middle ground, limited freedom under observation versus no freedom at all. The debate raged for hours. Jake listened to arguments from all sides, watched guardians he respected split into opposing camps. Some favored evacuation, unwilling to gamble with their children's safety. Others wanted to fight, convinced that backing down now would only encourage more aggression later. A smaller group thought negotiation was worth exploring, even if the terms weren't ideal. Finally, Chiron called for quiet. This decision cannot be made by the Council alone. Each guardian must choose what is right for themselves and their charge. We will vote in 3 days, after everyone has had time to consult with their children and consider the options fully. Until then, prepare for any possibility. Jake returned to his quarters in turmoil. Stella was waiting, having been brought back by Whisper as promised. The moment she saw his face, she knew something was wrong. Papa, what happened? Jake sat heavily in his rocking chair and gestured for Stella to join him. She climbed into his lap, still small enough at equivalent 7 years old to fit comfortably, and he wrapped his arms around her. Remember how I told you about the bad people who wanted to take you away? The ones who think beings like you should be controlled and used. The Concordat, Stella said. Her voice was steady, but Jake felt her trembling slightly. They found Haven. They're coming, and we have to decide what to do about it. Jake explained the 3 options in terms Stella could understand, not hiding the truth, but also not overwhelming her with details she wasn't ready for. When he finished, Stella was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, "What do you want to do, Papa?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "Part of me wants to run, to take you somewhere so remote that no one will ever find us. Part of me wants to stay and fight, because Haven has been good to us, and we owe it our loyalty. And part of me wonders if negotiating might actually work, if maybe the galaxy is changing, and beings like you might have rights that are protected instead of ignored. What would Uncle Roy do?" Jake smiled sadly at the question. Stella had never met Roy, but through Jake's stories, the old prospector had become a legendary figure in her imagination, the wise friend who always knew the right answer. Roy would probably say that sometimes there aren't any good choices, only less bad ones, and that the measure of a person isn't in avoiding hard decisions, but in facing them honestly. Stella turned in his lap to look at him directly. I don't want to leave Haven. This is my home. My friends are here. But I also don't want you to have to fight and get hurt protecting me. You're not young anymore, Papa. Hey now, Jake protested with mock offense. I'm not that old. You're 78, Stella said seriously. Mrs. Whisper told me that's very old for humans. She said you're healthy because Haven helps you, but that fighting would be dangerous for you. Jake couldn't argue with that. He was healthier than he'd been in decades, but he was still a 78-year-old man. If it came to combat, he'd be a liability more than an asset. What about the treaty? Stella asked. Would they really leave us alone if we signed it? I don't know. Little star. Treaties are only as good as the people enforcing them. But maybe ... maybe it's worth trying. Maybe the coalition really is different from the Concordat. They sat together in the rocking chair, watching Earth rotate slowly in the window display. After a while, Stella asked, Do you miss it, Earth? Every day, Jake admitted. I miss the desert, miss the smell of rain on hot sand, miss barbecue, and country music and a dozen other things I'll never experience again. But I don't regret leaving, not for a second. You're my home now, Stella. Wherever you are, that's where I belong. Stella hugged him tighter. I love you, Papa. I love you too, little star. Over the next 3 days, Jake spoke with other guardians, attended information sessions, and watched as Haven transformed from a peaceful sanctuary into a place of anxious preparation. Some families began packing, ready to evacuate at a moment's notice. Others started training in combat techniques, determined to defend their home. The negotiation faction grew slowly but steadily as more guardians realized that running forever was unsustainable and fighting might be suicidal. On the day of the vote, Jake stood in the council chamber with Stella beside him. Karen had decided that Catalyst children old enough to understand should be present for the decision. This was their future being determined after all. The voting process was conducted through a crystalline matrix that registered each Guardian's choice anonymously, but displayed the running totals for all to see. Jake watched the numbers climb. Evacuation, fight, negotiate. For the first hour, evacuation led by a significant margin. Then, slowly the tide began to shift toward negotiation. By the time all votes were cast, the results were clear. 42% for negotiation, 35% for evacuation, 23% for fighting. No majority, Curator Vex announced. According to Haven's charter, when no option receives more than 50% support, we must deliberate further. But Chiron stepped forward, raising one hand. No, we have spent 3 days in deliberation. More debate will only deepen divisions. I propose we honor all 3 choices. Those who wish to evacuate may do so with full support and resources. Those who wish to stay and fight will be given access to defensive training and equipment. And those who wish to attempt negotiation will form the delegation to meet with the Coalition and Concordat representatives. That's madness, one Guardian protested. We'll fragment ourselves into weakness. Perhaps, Chiron agreed. Or perhaps we'll demonstrate that there are multiple valid paths forward, and that respect for individual choice is what separates us from those who would control Catalyst beings. Let each family decide their own path. The proposal was put to a vote and passed with overwhelming support. Over the next week, Haven became a place of bittersweet farewells. 30 families chose evacuation, hugging friends goodbye with promises to reunite someday. They dispersed to worlds Jake had never heard of, carrying with them pieces of Haven's culture and community. 15 families chose to stay and prepare for possible combat. They moved to a separate section of Haven, that was reinforced and militarized, training with Liberation Front soldiers in tactics and offensive warfare. Jake visited them once and was disturbed by how quickly the sanctuary as peaceful gardens could be transformed into strategic positions and firing ranges. The remaining families, Jake and Stella among them, committed to the negotiation path. The coalition representatives returned with a preliminary treaty, and Jake found himself appointed to the review committee, representing human perspectives. The treaty negotiations were exhausting. The Concordat demanded access rights that felt invasive. The coalition pushed for compromise positions that satisfied no one completely. Liberation Front advisors warned that any treaty that legitimized oversight could be used to justify future encroachment. But slowly, painfully, a framework emerged. The final treaty proposal included Haven would remain autonomous but acknowledge coalition authority in matters of interstellar law. Annual inspections by neutral observers, not Concordat agents, a registry of catalyst beings, but encrypted and accessible only in cases of genuine emergency. Educational standards ensuring children learn control and ethics, but no restrictions on curriculum content, a prohibition on militarizing Haven or training catalyst beings as weapons. Most importantly, recognition that catalyst beings had rights as sentient individuals, not as property or resources. It's not perfect, Jake said during the final review session. But it's something. It's progress. 100 years ago on Earth, people like Stella wouldn't have had any rights at all. Change happens slowly, one treaty and one generation at a time. Sarah, the time traveler, nodded thoughtfully. In my era, we had nothing like this. The catalyst beings were hunted, imprisoned, experimented on. If this treaty had existed, thousands of lives would have been saved. We can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Taran, who had initially favored fighting, surprised everyone by supporting the treaty. My people have a saying, the warrior who wins without fighting is the truest victor. This treaty isn't surrender. It's strategy. We gain time, recognition, and legitimacy. If they break the treaty, we'll have moral authority to resist. If they honor it, we'll have achieved more than any battle could win. The treaty was signed in a ceremony attended by representatives from dozens of species. Jake stood with Stella, watching as Chiron and the coalition ambassadors placed their marks on documents that would reshape catalyst rights throughout the galaxy. It wasn't the ending he'd imagined when he first found a crying baby in that pod 5 years ago, but it was an ending that offered hope. In the aftermath, Haven slowly returned to its rhythms, though changed. The families who had evacuated were missed. The combat-trained guardians remained vigilant in their militarized section, still preparing for a fight that might never come. But for most residents, life resumed with a new undercurrent of cautious optimism. Jake continued Stella's education, focusing not just on power control, but on ethics and philosophy. He told her stories about Earth's civil rights movements, about how oppressed peoples throughout history had fought for recognition and dignity. He taught her that having power meant having responsibility, and that the greatest strength was often choosing not to use power at all. One evening, as Jake and Stella sat at their window watching Earth, Stella asked the question he'd been anticipating for years. Papa, do you think I'll ever go there? To Earth? Jake considered carefully before answering. The treaty includes provisions for cultural exchange. In a few years, when you're older and have better control, we could request a supervised visit. You wouldn't be able to stay, but you could see the desert, meet humans, understand the world that first sheltered you. Would we visit Uncle Roy? Jake's heart clenched. Roy would be ... He'd be pretty old by now, little star. Maybe older than still alive. The uncertainty of Roy's fate haunted him. In Haven's timeless environment, 5 years felt both longer and shorter than they should. On Earth, Roy would be 83 now. Had he survived the military's interrogation? Was he still telling stories about the cowboy and the alien baby? I want to meet him, Stella said firmly. I want to thank him for helping save me. If he's still with us, we'll find a way. I promise." Months passed. The Concordat inspectors came as scheduled, not the aggressive retrievers who had invaded Jake's cabin, but bureaucrats more interested in filing reports than causing trouble. They interviewed guardians, observed training sessions, and departed with notes about acceptable compliance with treaty standards. Life in Haven stabilized into a new normal. Stella continued to grow and develop, her powers expanding in ways that amazed even Melody. She could now influence entire ecosystems spanning several acres, could accelerate or slow growth cycles with precision, could even communicate with plants in a way that seemed almost telepathic. But she also remained a child playing with friends, arguing about whose turn it was to choose games, laughing at jokes that made no sense to adults. Jake treasured these moments of normalcy, knowing how precious they were. On the 5th anniversary of their arrival at Haven, Jake, now 79, and feeling every year of it despite the sanctuary's restorative effects, Kyron appeared at their quarters with news. "Jake, Stella, I have something to show you. Follow me, please." They were led to the communication center, where a large display showed a video transmission from Earth. Jake's breath caught when he recognized a face on the screen. Roy Mackey, older and frailer, but unmistakably alive, stared out from the display. He was sitting in what looked like a small apartment, surrounded by photographs and memorabilia from his prospecting days. "Jake," the recording began, and Jake felt tears spring to his eyes at hearing his friend's voice again. "I don't know if this message will reach you, or if you're even still alive out there among the stars. But I'm going to talk anyway, 'cause that's what us old coots do. We talk whether anyone's listening or not." Roy coughed, a wet sound that spoke of illness, but continued. "It's been 5 years since you left. 5 years of the world going crazy with debate about aliens and first contact and what happened in the Arizona desert. The video I recorded went viral, as the kids say. Millions of views. Made me a minor celebrity, which is both amusing and annoying." The old prospector smiled. "The military questioned me for weeks, but I never told them nothing useful. Played dumb, which ain't hard at my age. Eventually, they let me go. Figured I was just a confused old man who saw something strange and made up a story to explain it. They're still searching for you, Jake. Not just the military scientists, journalists, conspiracy theorists. Everyone wants to find the cowboy and his alien baby." Roy's expression grew serious. "But that ain't why I made this recording. I made it because I'm dying, Jake. Lung cancer, same thing that took Martha, but faster. Doctors say I got maybe 3 months, probably less. And I wanted to say goodbye proper, not like last time when we were both trying to be tough about it." Jake felt Stella's hand slip into his, squeezing tight. On screen, Roy continued. "You did the right thing, friend. Taking that child and protecting her. Choosing her future over your comfort. That was the bravest thing I ever saw. I hope she's grown up healthy and strong. I hope she knows she's got an Uncle Roy on Earth who tells stories about her to anyone who will listen. Made her into quite the legend around these parts." Roy chuckled weakly. "This message is being sent through channels I do and fully understand some Liberation Front contacts who found me through the viral video. They say it'll reach Haven, wherever and whatever that is. So if you're hearing this, Jake, know that I'm proud of you. Proud to have called you friend. And when I shuffle off this mortal coil, I'll go knowing that somewhere out in the cosmos, you're doing something that matters." The old prospector's eyes grew watery. "Take care of that little girl, Jake. Teach her about Earth, about the good parts, the sunsets, the wide open spaces, the way a cold beer tastes after a long day's work. But also teach her about kindness, about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Teach her what you taught me just by being you, that doing the right thing is its own reward." Roy raised a glass of what looked like whiskey. "Here's to you, Jake Thornton, the best damn cowboy I ever knew. And here's to Stella, wherever she is. May she grow up to be everything her parents hoped and more. And may you both know that you've got friends on Earth who remember, who care, and who hope that someday, somehow, paths might cross again. He drank, then smiled at the camera. All right, that's enough of this sentimental nonsense. Get back to living your life, Jake. That's what I'm gonna do with whatever time I got left. Until we meet again, old friend. May your trail be smooth and your water pure. The transmission ended. Jake stood frozen, tears streaming down his weathered face. Stella was crying too, mourning a man she'd never met but had loved through stories. When was this recorded? Jake asked Kyren. 2 months ago, Earth time. I'm sorry, Jake. Our contacts report that Roy Mackey passed away 3 weeks ago. He died peacefully, surrounded by friends who had gathered after word spread that he was ill. His last words were reportedly, "Tell Jake I said goodbye." Jake nodded, unable to speak. Stella threw her arms around him, and they stood together in the communication center, grieving across the impossible distance between Haven and Earth. That night, Jake and Stella sat in their quarters, looking at Earth through the window. Jake told stories about Roy, new ones, old ones, every memory he could summon. He wanted Stella to know the man who had helped save her life, who had stood by them when it mattered most. He sounds wonderful, Stella said quietly. I wish I could have met him. He would have loved you, Jake assured her. Would have spoiled you rotten, taught you to swear in 3 languages, and told you outrageous lies about wrestling mountain lions. They laughed together, the sound bitter and sweet simultaneously. Then Stella asked, Papa, when you die, will you send me a message like that, so I can hear your voice and remember? Jake pulled her close. Little star, I plan on being around for a good long while yet. Haven's restoration keeps me healthier than I got any right to be. But yes, when my time comes, I'll make sure you have something to remember me by. Though I hope by then you won't need recordings. I hope you will all have so many real memories that my voice lives in your head all the time, annoying you with advice and bad jokes. Your jokes aren't that bad, Stella said loyally. Now I know you're lying. They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the world that had brought them together rotate in the eternal darkness of space. Jake thought about the journey that had led him here, from lonely rancher to guardian of the stars, from a man waiting to die to a father with purpose and love. Roy's message had been a goodbye, but it had also been a gift confirmation that the choice he'd made 5 years ago had mattered, had rippled outward in ways he'd never see. The video that Roy recorded had changed conversations on Earth. The treaty that protected Haven had established precedents throughout the galaxy. And Stella, the crying baby he'd found in a pod, was growing into someone extraordinary, not because of her powers, but because of her kindness, curiosity, and courage. Papa, Stella said sleepily, tell me again about the night we met, about the stars and the crash, and how you decided to protect me. Jake smiled and began the story he'd told 100 times, each telling slightly different, each one treasured. It was a night like any other in the Arizona desert. The stars were bright, the air was cool, and I was an old man sitting alone on his porch, thinking his life was basically over. Then the sky exploded in colors I'd never seen before. As he spoke, Stella's eyes grew heavy, her breathing deepened. By the time he reached the part about finding the pod, she was asleep against his chest. Jake held her carefully, this child who had saved him as surely as he'd saved her, and felt profound gratitude for every choice that had led to this moment. Outside the window, Earth continued its endless rotation. Somewhere down there, Roy Mackey had been laid to rest in the desert soil he'd loved. Somewhere down there, people looked up at the stars and wondered what mysteries they held. And somewhere in between, in a fold of space-time that shouldn't exist, an old cowboy and a young alien child proved that love transcends species, that family is built through choice rather than blood, and that sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of something even more beautiful. Jake Thornton, who had once thought his purpose was finished, now understood that purpose isn't something you find. It's something you create through the choices you make and the love you give. He had found an alien baby crying in the desert and decided to protect it. That single act of compassion had changed everything. And as he sat in the quiet of Haven, holding his sleeping daughter beneath the stars, Jake knew with absolute certainty that he would make the same choice again. Every time. Forever. The end was just another beginning. And the stars, infinite and eternal, bore witness to it all.